Hi everyone. So last time we just talked about globalization and we also have a pending task about intercultural communication. So today we will first talk about cultural texts and formal and informal language. Let me share my screen. So in this lesson, we're going to learn about how to understand the importance of cultural contexts and of course differentiate formal and informal language. So what are cultural texts? When we talk about texts, first thing that comes to our mind is about writings, but it's not limited um, to written texts. There are also films, artifacts, and other things that convey meanings. For example, when you look into the designs, and then into the arrangement of the chairs and tables, even into behavior, you can see that these texts are reflection of one's own culture that we can use in order to understand their cultures better. So, if, for example, if you look into this picture, okay, so cultural texts are also objects, actions, and behavior that reveals something about the culture. So, when you analyze a photo or an image, it contains cultural information beyond just the picture itself. Even the food, it says something about the culture. The house and the clothing says something about the culture. So it goes beyond what we can just see, but what it implies or what it tells something about the culture that we are trying to understand. Even the interactions among people, the rituals and the rules manifests readable texts that we can read, analyze, or interpret because they impose cultural relevance. Now let's talk about the difference between formal and informal language. When to differentiate, or when is it appropriate to use formal and when is it appropriate to use informal language. So deciding the formality or if you're going to use formal language or informal language is very important. It's compared, as important as wearing the proper outfit for an event. Of course, if it is a special or informal event, you don't want to wear sports attire. And it is something that's just casual. You're going to play sports like basketball. Of course, you don't want to wear sleeves or tuxedos. So we shall be able to understand what's the when is it the time to use formal and when is it the time to use informal. So, for example, for informal language, it's usually used when you are relaxed, people that you're very close with, and and for these instances, we are allowed to use slang, abbreviations, and expressions of emotion, even exclamations. The things you are surprised, the things that you are very that um, that you are really passionate or emotional with. You usually have the freedom to express it in your own words or even using your expressions that are just common to you. Friendly talks or and and daily conversations with our family members, friends, and very close acquaintances are some examples when we can use informal language. Well, on the other hand, formal language is more prevalent for writing. When we write, usually we use formal language. It uses what we call standard English, although standard English has also been questioned since it's also dependent on what context, what culture you are in, for you to determine what is the standard in your context or in your place. And some characteristics that are noted are there are more complex sentence structures, informal language, we don't just use simple sentences. So there are complex sentences, compound sentences. We use conjunctions. Sometimes we combine two sentences into one, and there's a lot of colloquial, no colloquial slang and other informal terms. For example, this is these are the examples of informal. They've been arguing. She's been very busy. I planned many different outcomes. So please read the other sample sentences. Because on the next slide, or in the next slide, we are going to read and analyze how we can make these sentences formal or more formal. So they have been. So instead of saying Dave or writing Dave, They apostrophe ve, there's no contraction. Okay, we don't shorten it. We don't combine it to words. We are going to spell out two words. They have. They space have, as well as she is. Okay. So it was also felt that objectives is unreasonable, and other words, other sentences that have been used more formal. Okay. So instead of using for the third one, I planned many different outcomes. Next, we felt the objective. So instead of using the first person point of view, we used a passive, okay, passive voice. Instead of saying I planned many different outcomes were planned for the party. Instead of saying we felt the objective, it is felt that the objective is reasonable. How about the other one? The famous soccer team we saw at the bus station went to Toronto. What's the formal version? The famous soccer team we saw at the bus station went to Toronto. Okay? So so we are also going to analyze the receptionist who answered the phone was very rude. Okay? The receptionist who answered the phone was very rude. So there are no much differences about these sentences. But for me, instead of using some other slang terms, so these are the ways on how we can make them more formal. Okay, so there are two differences that have been noted. No contractions. Okay, instead of using they have or I'm, we can use I am. Instead of they've, we can use they have. And then another, there's a proper time and place for everything. Okay, and that applies to language, just like in the example that we gave for formal and informal attire. So what are the other differences that we have here in this slide? Formal writing, written for an audience that you don't know on a personal level, where you're not very close, you're not friends, you don't live in the same house. So it is more academic and more complex, right? Formal writing is more serious in its tone, and informal consists of short sentences, it's just simple sentences, more personal setting. It's like writing a letter to a friend or a diary entry. It's more relaxed compared to its counterpart, which is formal writing. Which style is appropriate? Formal writing, when you are writing professionally, of course, when you want to reach out to a client or a prospect. Academic writing, when you are submitting these to your educators, your mentors, essays, research papers, job applications, of course, your resumes, um, curriculum written, cover letters, we use formal writing, as well as when you are reaching out to someone you don't know, um, particularly when it is going to be your first time, yes, we use formal writing. Informal writing, when you are friends or you are already friends, you are sharing a story or writing a personal blog. Of course, you want to tell these experiences, our own experiences, creatively. or when you're instructed to do so. There are also exceptions in school activities wherein your teachers will ask you to write a letter to your friend or to your mom. Okay, in writing dialogues and conversations, of course, the teacher, the requirement usually expects daily conversations or normal conversations that don't usually occur in formal gatherings anyway. And then writing an outline, so we don't have to be formal at that time since it's just an outline. Things to remember: formal writing includes ideas or rules, such as furthermore. To exemplify, we use these transitional devices instead of just using and, okay, or. So it is better to use some of these conjunctions, subordinating conjunctions that sound more formal. Okay, we instead of cannot. Okay, do not use contractions. We will use cannot instead of can't, because can't is a contraction of cannot. And to sound more formal, let us spell the whole word, the complete word cannot. Okay, it does not offer personal opinions. Of course, in formal writing, we are more objective. We base it on studies, research, or even statistics. Because in formal writing, there are some audience who will try to question or oppose our arguments. So it's better if we have basis and if we have evidence for all the arguments that we are going to say to be more objective. We don't use colloquial or informal language. We don't use slang or unfamiliar jargons that we use in our everyday conversations with friends or family members. So we try to use other words or synonyms that can replace um, these informal expressions. For example, very common is there's a lot of there's a lot of words, or there's a lot of mistakes. So instead of saying there's a lot of, there are many, okay, mistakes. Or there's a lot of food, or okay, there's plenty of food. We try to just think of other words that can use these, that can replace these slang expressions. And vocabulary is of a higher level. Thesaurus may help. It's like a dictionary. Okay, thesaurus is like a dictionary, but you can find other words that are more suitable, okay, and appropriate in the context, and of course, in what we are trying to mean. Use subject specific, okay, epithelial skills instead of skin cells. Because when you talk about skin cells, there may be other examples, okay, or types of skin cells or categories. So they try to be more specific. So this is more of a biological example. Okay, do not use first person pronoun I or me because it becomes very personal. So we don't use I or me. You can just use it is. For example, instead of saying I believe that this is good, it is believed that it is good. Okay, another we don't have to use for me, right? Because it sounds more of an opinion or opinionated in that way. For informal language, yeah, okay. So there are also informal settings when you're talking to your friends, okay, long time acquaintances. You don't have to be formal. You can use I, okay. You can use slang expressions or terms. It was cool, all right. We chilled, all right. And it's okay to use can't just to make it more fluid and more relaxed instead of saying the complete word cannot, or instead of spelling it out. And of course, in informal language, you are free to express your emotions, more open or expressive and verbal about what you feel and about your opinions. So they are more acceptable in this form. And lastly, empathy. So for us to know if we should use a language that is more formal or informal, we have to understand. Let us try to put ourselves in the shoes of others. Let us try to think Like them, let us try to consider what they are possibly feeling so that we can be able to have a common understanding. In fact, when the person is convinced that you understand what they are feeling, they will not just become more open, but they will also start listening to you as well. Of course, we don't want to listen to people who usually won't listen or won't try to understand us. And that can also be the basis whether to use formal or informal language in that situation. In your case, would you like to be talked in a formal manner? Okay, especially for people whom you don't know very well, or with people who are in a different levels. Yours probably at you're the teacher and the one you're talking to is the student, or you're the boss and the one you're talking to is an employee, or the other way around. You're going to use formal or informal. Or if you're friends, would you love your friends to be talking in a very formal manner? Those are the things that can easily help us. What form, okay, or what style of language can we use based on or related to cultural texts as well? Thank you so much for listening. And in the comment section, we would love you to post your reactions. All right. So you can write your reflection or how you can relate on to these lessons. You can give a sample situation, okay, a conflict and communication that you have experienced. It is better if it has something to do with culture. It is intercultural communication. And tell us how you addressed it, how you resolved it, how you have come up have you come up with a common or mutual understanding in order to resolve the conflict. So that will be all for today. We will be expecting that each one of you will be able to post their comments and we can see all your examples or experiences that you have shared in the comment section below. If you have questions, feel free to message me anytime or reserve them for our next meeting. See you again next time. Goodbye for now.